They warned me psych patients would test my patience, maybe even frighten me. But no textbook prepared me for the night. A stranger in restraints recited details about my childhood bedroom. Details no one alive should have known. For 11 years, I practiced psychiatry at St. Augustine Behavioral Health on the south side of Providence, Rhode Island. Our hospital was an old brick monolith arched windows, steam pipes that hissed in winter, a chapel no one visited, and hallways where the fluorescent lights hummed just slightly out of tune with each other. It was the kind of place where the past never quite left. If you were superstitious, you might say it lingered. My name is Dr. Eleanor Price, board-certified psychiatrist, faculty appointment, steady outcomes, need charts. I believed in differential diagnoses and structured interviews, in the reliability of scales and inventories that turned human suffering into numbers you could graph. Delusions had patterns. Hallucinations had triggers. The mind was mysterious, yes, but not unknowable. That certainty sustained me until room 12. He arrived on a sleeting night in January 2019, escorted by city police after a disturbance behind a shuttered diner on Broad Street. No ID, no phone, no records in the system. Mid-30s, lean build, shallow cuts on both wrists, fresh but careful, like someone tracing the idea of harm without committing to it. The officer who signed the intake form wouldn't meet my eyes when I asked what happened. He kept saying my old partner's name, he muttered, and he's been dead 6 years. Then he slid the pen back across the counter and left. The patient's chart read, John Smith, because bureaucracy demands that ghosts wear names. He was placed in room 12 observation bed, ligature-safe fixtures, camera mounted above the door. When I entered, he sat on the mattress with his hands folded, soft leather restraints buckled but slack. He looked up without surprise, as if I had arrived precisely on time for an appointment I hadn't scheduled. Good evening, I said, crisp and professional. I'm Dr. Price. He tilted his head. You prefer Ellie when you're thinking, but you sign Eleanor on the chart. A clean line of ink, pill-shaped loops on the O's. I didn't react. Patients bluff. They fish for tells and build illusions out of micro-expressions. Training teaches you to keep your face a calm lake. How do you know my name? I asked evenly. You wear it like a badge, he replied. Not the plastic one. The one under your sternum. His eyes drifted toward the camera, then back to me, pale gray and unblinking. Do you still keep the seashell on your nightstand? The one with the crack? My mouth went dry. The shell had been a gift from my father on a winter trip to Narragansett when I was 8 white ridges, hairline fracture. He died when I was 22. I had never mentioned the shell to anyone at St. Augustine's. Not once. What's your name? I asked. He smiled, small and patient. You won't like it when I say it. Try me. He looked past me, toward the corner where the paint had bubbled from a steam leak long ago. Names are stories. Some stories are traps. He exhaled softly. For now, call me Isaac. No last name, no address. He answered my structured questions calmly, then derailed them with precision. No, he didn't hear voices. Not the way you mean. No, he wasn't being followed. They're already here. He denied suicidal intent. Cuts are reminders, and laughed, not unkindly, when I asked about substance use. His vitals were normal, labs clean. His hands were warm despite the sleet. Why the diner? I asked. Why tonight? Isaac studied me like a puzzle he'd solved long before this room. Because you took call tonight, he said. Because you were going to walk away soon, but not yet. Because there are things you insist on measuring that cannot be measured, and that conflict will bruise you until you change. Change how? You'll stop pretending you're only a doctor. A thread of anger cut through my fear. I am a doctor. His eyes softened, almost pitying. You are also a daughter who still listens for a man who is gone. I felt the room tilt just slightly, like an elevator settling. I rechecked the restraints, not because he struggled, but because I needed something procedural to anchor myself. This conversation is being recorded, I said, gesturing toward the camera. Anything you claim will be reviewed by a committee that believes in paperwork, he finished. They will call me non-compliant when I don't give you a pass you can type. Before I could redirect, his gaze sharpened. The paint chip under your desk, he said, almost gently. You keep it because the day you found it, your hands were shaking, and you told yourself a crack in a wall was easier to fix than a crack in a heart. That detail was private, in a way that had no business belonging to anyone else. I think we're done for tonight, I said, rising. As I reached the door, the overhead light flickered. Not unusual in a building older than most of its patients. But the camera blinked with its red LED, cutting out and flaring back on. In that 1-second darkness, I heard him speak in a tone I hadn't yet heard, low, certain, reverent. Tomorrow, Isaac whispered. Bring the shell. I didn't answer. The door clicked behind me. In the nurse's station, the night tech frowned at his console. Room 12's feed glitched, he said. Only that one? He tapped the monitor, coaxing the image back into clarity. An empty bed, restraints neat, a man sitting perfectly still, like a figure in a chapel. I told myself he was a gifted manipulator, a fast reader of faces, a man who had learned to slip keys into the locks of other people's memories. I wrote probable personality disorder, RO psychosis. Consider dissociative features. I signed Eleanor Price, ND, neat pill-shaped loops, and forced myself to go home. At 3:11 a.m., I woke to the faintest sound, surf in a shell cupped to an ear. Only I wasn't holding the shell. It sat on my nightstand, hairline fracture catching the streetlight, and for a moment, just a moment, I could have sworn it was whispering. The following morning, I arrived early, clutching a travel mug, bitter coffee. My notes from the night before already felt unstable, as though I'd written them in a dream. Probable personality disorder. Consider psychosis. Standard words for an utterly non-standard encounter. When I reached the nurse's station, Carla, our charge nurse, handed me a chart without looking up. Room 12 didn't sleep, she said. Vitals normal. Just sat there humming. Humming? Same tune all night. Gave me the creeps. Inside, Isaac was exactly as I'd left him. Calm, upright, hands folded. His restraints had been loosened Carla's choice, not mine, but he hadn't moved from the mattress. When I entered, his humming stopped mid-note, like a record needle lifted. Good morning, doctor, he said. His voice was smooth, casual. How's the crack in the shell? I froze. He shouldn't have known I'd even touched it, much less noticed the fracture more closely. Let's start with some basics, I said, flipping open my notepad. Orientation questions. Do you know where you are? A place where walls listen, he answered. And cameras blink when I speak too loudly. I kept my tone neutral. The city? Providence, he said immediately, though you think of it as temporary. You've considered leaving more than once. Boston. Maybe Baltimore. My pen stuttered across the page. I hadn't voiced those plans to anyone, not even colleagues. And the year? 2019. The year you finally admit you can't hide in diagnosis forever. I closed the notepad. Do you understand how dangerous these statements sound? He smiled faintly. Only to someone who insists secrets stay buried. I shifted tactics. Do you hear voices other than mine? Not voices, threads. Sometimes they knot together. Sometimes they fray. He leaned closer, restraints creaking softly. And sometimes they wrap around doctors who pretend grief makes them sharper instead of weaker. My chest tightened. This wasn't psychosis in the clinical sense. His answers weren't disorganized. They were pointed, surgical. "Who told you about my father?" I demanded. "No one," he said simply. "You keep him alive every time you measure yourself against him. I only listen." For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the faint hum of the vent. Finally, he added, almost kindly, "You'll understand soon. That's why I'm here." I left the session unsettled, more shaken than I wanted to admit. Outside, Carla whispered, "He knows things, doesn't he?" I didn't answer, but in my pocket, I felt a slip of plaster. When I reached inside, my fingers closed on a chip of white paint, the exact size and shape of the one under my office desk. Only I hadn't been near my office all morning. By the third day, it wasn't just me. The staff began whispering about Isaac, not openly St. Augustine's discouraged gossip, but in the sideways glances exchanged at the nurse's station, in the clipped tones over morning coffee. Carla admitted he knew about her divorce. "He said the exact words my ex used the night he left," she murmured, eyes wide. "Even the part about the broken lamp. I never told anyone that." Later, Dr. Harris, our junior resident, cornered me outside the staff lounge. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette he wasn't supposed to have. He asked me how my daughter liked the stuffed owl I gave her last Christmas. My custody agreement doesn't allow me to talk about her with patients. How the hell does he know? I tried to steady them both, reminding them that patients often manipulate, that personal boundaries are our armor. But inside, I knew these weren't mere guesses. He was carving through defenses with a scalpel of impossibly specific details. That evening, I returned to room 12, determined to reassert control. I brought structured assessments, standardized test tools meant to pin down delusion, quantify thought disorder. Isaac complied, polite as always. He aced memory tests, navigated logic puzzles, even completed the Rorschach with uncanny precision. But then, mid-test, he looked at the ink blot and said, "This one looks like the scar on your wrist, the one you hide with your watch." I froze. Beneath my sleeve, faint and pale, was the reminder of a college year darker than I like to recall. Only 2 people in my life had ever seen it. "You shouldn't do that," I said tightly. "Do what?" His voice was calm. "Speak what you already carry?" When I cut the session short, Isaac chuckled softly. "Doctor, it isn't me you fear. It's the mirror I'm holding." That night, I stayed late to finish paperwork. The halls were nearly empty, the hum of fluorescence the only sound. When I finally stood, stretching stiff legs, I noticed something on my desk. A seashell, my seashell, the one I kept at home on my knit stand. I drove back to my apartment at midnight, heart pounding. The knit stand was empty. Within a week, Isaac wasn't confined to room 12 anymore. Not physically, but in whispers, in presence. Staff began reporting sightings, little things at first. The night janitor swore he saw Isaac standing at the far end of a locked hallway, barefoot, hands folded. When he blinked, the figure was gone. The janitor refused to clean the psych wing again. Carla came to me pale as chalk after a night shift. "I went to check his restraints," she said. But when I opened the door, he was already waiting at the window. He turned and said, "Don't bother tonight. Your son is safe." Her son had been sick that week. Only Carla and pediatrics knew. Even the security guards, usually the least shaken, grew uneasy. One admitted the surveillance feed for room 12 glitched constantly, but only when Isaac looked directly into the lens. "It's like he knows we're watching," the guard muttered. "Like he's watching back." I tried to keep sessions clinical, but Isaac controlled the tempo. He would answer calmly, then slip in precise knives. "You'll resign soon," he told me one afternoon, voice almost sympathetic. "Not because of me, but because the questions will never stop once they've started." When I pressed him for sources, for explanations, he only tilted his head. You're looking in the wrong place. You think secrets live in people. They live in places. In walls, in objects, in every unspoken moment that never really dies. That evening, as I reviewed notes in my office, the fluorescent bulb above me flickered. For a heartbeat, the room plunged into darkness. In that instant, I heard a whisper, not in my ear, but inside my chest. Dr. Ellie. The light returned. Papers lay scattered on the floor, though I hadn't moved. When I finally dared return home, I found the seashell waiting again, this time on my kitchen counter. A fine line of salt water pooled beneath it. I hadn't touched the ocean in months. By mid-February, the hospital had changed. The walls carried tension like static before a storm. Staff avoided room 12 unless absolutely necessary. Conversations dropped when his name surfaced. Some refused to say it at all, as if words themselves gave him more ground. During rounds, I entered with 2 nurses. Isaac sat upright, calm, restraints loose. He turned to the younger nurse, Maya, and said softly, "You shouldn't drive home tonight. The red truck won't see you." Maya froze, knuckles white on the chart in her hands. "What truck?" she whispered. Isaac smiled. "You'll understand if you ignore me." Maya requested reassignment by the end of the shift. The next morning, her car was sideswiped on Elmwood Avenue by a pickup that ran a light. She wasn't seriously hurt, but she quit St. Augustine's that week. That incident broke whatever fragile barrier remained. Fear spread like contagion. Techs claimed to hear him humming through the vents. Patients in other rooms reported dreams of a pale man standing at the foot of their beds. I confronted him in session, forcing my voice steady. "You're scaring my staff. That ends now." He didn't argue. He only studied me, unblinking. Then he said, "You've been thinking about the bridge again." My stomach dropped. He was right. 2 nights before, driving home across the Washington Bridge, I'd pictured what it would be like to veer just slightly, to let the black water swallow me. I hadn't spoken that thought aloud to anyone. Not ever. "How do you know that?" I demanded. He leaned forward, eyes luminous in the sterile light. "Because you thought it so loudly, the river itself heard." I cut the session short, hands trembling as I signed the chart. Observation continues, no acute risk. Words that meant nothing anymore. That night, when I reached my apartment, the seashell wasn't on the counter. It was in my bed, resting on the pillow where my head should have been. I didn't sleep. By March, St. Augustine no longer felt like a hospital. It felt like a stage Isaac's stage. It began with the machines. Monitors froze mid-readout, then blinked back with impossible values. Heart rates of 0 on living patients, blood pressures that matched staff members' vitals instead. When biomedical engineers inspected the equipment, they found nothing wrong. One night during IQ rounds, every ventilator alarmed simultaneously. I sprinted down the hall with 3 nurses, only to find each machine cycling normally, patients stable, numbers green. Yet the alarms wailed until we stepped into room 12, where they cut off one by one as Isaac looked up and smiled. The staff unraveled. Carla stopped making eye contact. Harris began drinking during breaks. Even seasoned nurses whispered prayers under their breath when passing the psych wing. I tried to reassert control through documentation, through the anchor of words, but my charts turned strange. Whole sentences appeared in my handwriting I didn't remember writing. "He already knows your dreams," or "You will leave medicine." I tore those pages out, hid them in my desk. During our next session, I asked directly, "What are you doing to this hospital?" Isaac tilted his head, calm as ever. "I'm not breaking it. I'm loosening it. Walls like these. They hold too much. Sometimes they need to breathe." "You're destroying my staff." "No," he said softly. They're destroying themselves. I only give them mirrors. That night, as I left the building, I heard the humming again. Not from room 12, not from any vent, from the walls themselves, the pipes, the plaster, a low, steady resonance, as though the building had found its own voice. At home, the seashell waited on the bathroom sink. This time, when I picked it up, salt water spilled from its crack and dripped onto the tile. The ocean was following me. The first violent break came on a storm-lashed Tuesday night. The E was quiet, thunder rolling over Providence, when the code gray alarm blared, "Violent patient, East Wing." I arrived to chaos. A security guard, one of our veterans, had snapped. He was shouting at no one visible, fists striking the wall until blood spattered white paint. He won't stop whispering. He screamed, "He's in my head. He's in my head." It took 4 staff and a syringe of haloperidol to drag him down. His knuckles were shredded, his eyes wild. 2 hours later, another call ICU. A recovering pneumonia patient had torn out her IVs, insisting the pale man was standing over her bed. When nurses rushed in, monitors glitched static across every screen. She collapsed moments later, no pulse. We coded for 20 minutes. Nothing. Time of death, 2:17 a.m. When I returned to room 12, Isaac sat calmly, as if nothing in the building had shifted. He looked up and asked, "Do you feel the seams yet?" "What seams?" I demanded. He gestured slowly around the room. "Between what you measure and what you deny." I left before he could say more, chest tight. The next morning, the hospital's chapel flooded, no burst pipe, no leak. Just standing water covering the floor, inches deep, clear as glass. Maintenance pumped it out, baffled. By evening, the water returned, this time faintly salty. Carla refused to go near the chapel again. "It smells like the ocean," she whispered. By the end of the week, staff were resigning daily. Patients transferred. Entire wings closed. Yet room 12 remained occupied, untouched. That night, I stayed late again, unable to leave. Passing his door, I glanced in. Isaac sat cross-legged on the mattress, humming softly. The tune was one I recognized, my father's favorite hymn. By April, St. Augustine was no longer a functioning hospital. It was an organism unraveling from the inside. Entire shifts walked out mid-duty. A radiology tech smashed every monitor in her wing before being restrained. The cafeteria shut down after staff swore the walk-in freezer whispered their names when the door closed. The maintenance chief quit on the spot when he found every pipe in the basement dripping salt water despite the city supply being clean. But it wasn't just the staff. Patients began to reflect Isaac's presence. Those with dementia spoke lucidly, only to repeat fragments of his phrases. Walls breathe. Mirrors, the ocean remembers. A comatose man whispered my name as I checked his chart, though his vocal cords had been declared non-functional months prior. Administration panicked. The board called for Isaac's transfer to a state facility, but every attempt failed. Paperwork vanished. Ambulances arrived, but their engines died on hospital grounds. Even when 2 guards physically tried to move him, they returned minutes later, dazed and empty-handed, swearing they'd lost track of time. I begged them to shut the hospital down, evacuate, cut the power, anything. But bureaucracy dragged its feet. No one wanted to admit something impossible was happening. Psychotic contagion, they called it. Mass hysteria. Words to box the unboxable. Then came the night of the blackout. April 16th, 11:47 p.m., a storm hammered Providence. Lightning struck nearby, and the hospital lost power. Backup generators flickered on except in the East Wing. Except in room 12. I made my way down dark halls, flashlight beam, cutting through stale air. The wing was colder than the rest of the building, as if something were drawing the heat away. The closer I got, the louder I heard it, humming, low and constant, vibrating through the floor. When I reached room 12, I froze. Isaac was gone. His restraints lay neatly folded on the mattress. The window was open, though it had been sealed for decades. Rain lashed inside, soaking the sheets. On the wall, written in what looked like water stains, were 6 words. You were always part of this. Behind me, footsteps. I spun, beam catching Carla's face ashen, eyes wide. He's everywhere, she whispered. Check the other rooms. We did. Every patient in the psych wing sat upright in bed, eyes open, humming the same tune Isaac had hummed. My father's hymn. I staggered back, bile rising. Carla bolted, footsteps echoing down the dark hall. And somewhere in the distance, through the storm, I swore I heard waves crashing. Not thunder, waves. After the blackout night, St. Augustine never recovered. Power came back to most wings, but the east wing remained dim, as though the building itself refused light. Staff transfers became permanent. Rooms were locked, wards abandoned. Yet patients lingered, humming, waiting. I tried to discharge as many as possible. Families resisted. Some claimed their relatives were finally lucid for the first time in years, though their lucidity consisted only of repeating Isaac's phrases. Others refused to even enter the building, shaking their heads at me like I was complicit in something unspeakable. Then came the water. It seeped from the cracks in walls, from the seams of tiles, from elevator doors. Not floods, not leaks, thin trickles of salt water, always faintly warm, always carrying that smell of deep ocean brine. Maintenance tore apart pipes, rewired systems, blamed faulty valves. Nothing stopped it. By mid-May, the psych wing floors shimmered under a permanent sheen. Shoes squeaked like we were walking on a dock after rain, and with the water came voices. At first, faint like murmurs just out of earshot. Then louder. Nurses reported hearing patients whispering in corridors when their beds were empty. The AS clerk said she heard her dead husband's voice in the stairwell. Harris, already frayed, cornered me in the staff lounge, trembling. Doc, they're talking in the vents, not patients them. They know things I never told a soul. I wanted to dismiss it. But that night, in my own office, as I reviewed charts, I heard my daughter's laugh. Ellie's laugh. Clear, bubbling, innocent. It came from the corner of the room, where the seashell now sat permanently on my desk. I slammed the shell into a drawer, locked it, but the laughter continued, soft and steady, until dawn. Room 12 was no longer empty. Though Isaac's body had vanished, the room breathed him. Monitors flickered, though unplugged. The window rattled, though no wind touched it. And on some nights, if you looked quickly, you could see a figure sitting cross-legged on the bed, humming. Carla came to me in June, her face hollow. He's not gone, she whispered. He never leaves. He just spreads. This place is drowning from the inside. Her words proved truer than I wanted to believe. Because 2 days later, the entire basement filled waist-deep with salt water overnight. No storm, no pipe burst. Security footage showed the tide literally rising from the floor, as if the Atlantic itself had found a vein into our foundation. I stood at the threshold with administrators and city inspectors, the smell of ocean air heavy. And in that brine, floating gently toward me, was the seashell. The same one from my desk. The one I had locked away. By midsummer, St. Augustine had become unrecognizable. The city threatened closure, but bureaucracy stalled. Meanwhile, we lived inside a sinking ship. The basement flood never drained. Pumps failed within hours of operation, their motors corroded as if they'd run underwater for years. Inspectors stopped returning my calls. The hospital administration kept filing reports no one read. On paper, we were still a functioning psychiatric facility. In reality, we were rotting from within. Time itself began to fracture. One evening, I left my office at 9 p.m., exhausted, only to find the lobby daylight bright, patients and visitors bustling as though it were noon. I stumbled back to my office, checked the clock 9:07, returned to the lobby dark, deserted, thunder rattling the glass doors. Another night, Carla swore she completed a 12-hour shift only to discover her watch had moved 30 minutes. "It's like the hours are drowning," she told me, clutching her wrist as if to anchor herself. The water worsened everything. It climbed slowly, invisibly. Hall carpets stayed damp no matter how often replaced. Patient records warped in their cabinets, ink blurring. The chapel was closed permanently after pews floated one morning in waist-high brine. Yet the hospital continued, half-staffed, half-lit, as if denial alone could keep us afloat. Then the first confirmed death came. A nurse named Adrian was found in the east stairwell. His lungs were filled with salt water, though his clothes were dry. The autopsy made no sense. The death certificate read, "Accidental drowning," but there was no water in that stairwell, not a drop. I went to room 12 that night, driven by something I couldn't name. The door was unlocked, though no one had touched it in weeks. Inside, the air smelled sharp, metallic like a storm over open water. On the bed sat the seashell, glistening with fresh brine. I approached slowly, hand trembling. And then I heard Ellie's voice again, faint but clear. "Daddy, come in. It's safe here." The shell pulsed once in my palm when I picked it up. For a moment, I swore I saw waves rolling across the walls, turning plaster into a shifting ocean surface. And then, in the reflection of that impossible tide, I saw him. Isaac, standing behind me, his eyes pale, face calm. "You're learning," he said. "Soon you'll stop pretending there's a difference between here and there." I spun around. The room was empty. Only the seashell remained, dripping steadily onto the mattress. By July, St. Augustine was almost empty. Whole wards shut down. Administrators stopped showing up. The cafeteria was locked, the gift shop abandoned, entire parking lots overgrown with weeds. What staff remained moved like ghosts, eyes down, avoiding certain corridors as though instinctively knowing where Isaac's shadow lingered. Carla lasted longer than most, but even she broke. One morning she handed me her badge with trembling hands. "He's in my son's dreams now," she whispered. "Last night, Tommy said a pale man told him to wait by the shore. He's only 6. I won't come back here." I didn't stop her. That left fewer than a dozen of us. Skeleton staff. Doctors without patients, nurses without orders. The hospital was decaying yet alive, breathing brine, exhaling hymns through its vents. The hum never ceased. Sleep abandoned me. When I closed my eyes, I drifted instantly to water. Endless black waves, stretching forever, and a figure standing barefoot on the surface. Isaac. Always Isaac. He didn't speak in those dreams. He only smiled, patient, as if waiting for me to step forward. The city sent inspectors once more in late July, escorted by police. They lasted 30 minutes. When they emerged, their faces were pale, their radios sputtering static. One officer muttered, "There's no way you're still practicing medicine in there." But the report filed later declared the hospital structurally sound, minor plumbing issues. A lie so transparent it might as well have been written by Isaac himself. On August 2nd, I walked the empty East Wing. Most rooms were deserted, but a few patients remained, those with no families, no homes. They sat upright in bed, eyes unfocused, humming softly. The same hymn. My father's hymn. In the last room, I paused. The wallpaper bubbled as though something pressed from beneath. Water trickled from the ceiling, steady and rhythmic, like a clock ticking. The patient in the bed smiled at me and whispered, "It's almost time, doctor." That night, back in my office, I found the seashell waiting on my chair, not wet this time. Dry, bleached, sharp-edged. Inside, instead of a hollow, something glimmered like an eye staring back. And then I heard Isaac's voice, not behind me, not ahead, but inside my own skull. "The tide doesn't come to you, doctor. You go to it. Don't be the last to learn." The hum deepened. The walls trembled. And somewhere below, I swore I heard a vast door creak open, as if the hospital itself had invited the ocean inside. The hospital died on August 9th. That evening, I arrived to find the main entrance doors wide open, swaying in humid night air. No guards. No lights. The lobby reeked of salt. The marble floor shimmered under 2 inches of standing water. I waded through, shoes filling with brine, every step echoing like I walked across a drowned cathedral. The silence was unbearable, broken only by distant humming. The hymn, impossibly loud yet sourceless, as if the walls themselves sang. The east wing called me. I didn't choose, I followed. The water deepened with every haul until it lapped at my waist. Ceiling tiles sagged and dripped. Patient charts floated past, ink dissolved into nothing. The smell of ocean air was overwhelming. Room 12 waited. Its door stood open, waves curling at the threshold. I stepped inside. The bed was gone. The window gone. In their place stretched a corridor of endless black water, moonlight shimmering across the surface, though there was no moon above. At its center stood Isaac, barefoot, dry, humming. "You came," he said, voice soft, almost grateful. "What are you?" I managed, throat raw. He tilted his head, smiling. "A mirror. A tide, the space between knowing and drowning. I am what hospitals hide. Every secret unspoken, every fear untreated. And you," his eyes gleamed, "you've listened long enough to hear." The seashell pulsed in my pocket. I pulled it out, and for the first time, I noticed what was etched along its rim. Names. Hundreds of names, some familiar patients, staff, even my father's. And near the edge, newly carved, was mine. "This place is finished," I whispered. "No," Isaac replied. "This place is beginning." He stretched out a hand. Behind him, the black water rippled, rising, swelling like a heartbeat. I should have run. Instead, I stepped closer, water now at my chest, my throat. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you never looked away." The tide surged. Salt filled my mouth. The hymn rose into a roar, crashing waves against unseen cliffs. For a heartbeat, I saw Ellie, my daughter, standing at the far shore, reaching for me, her face radiant, alive. And then the water swallowed everything. I woke days later or years. I can't be sure, on a beach I didn't recognize. The seashell lay beside me, dry, silent. St. Augustine was gone. Not collapsed. Not demolished. Gone. An empty lot where a hospital once stood. But when I hold the shell to my ear, I don't hear the ocean. I hear corridors, footsteps, machines, and Isaac's voice steady, patient. "The tide never leaves, doctor. It only waits."